I love designing within constraints because it creates more kind of opportunity for you to really innovate and kind of come up with like, more radical ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have.
Even though you've raised in the past, I imagine there still has to be that morning you wake up, you grab some coffee, you log in, and you check the balance, and you sort of go,
If you're growing a business, then you're realizing, okay, I need more capital. That's a big distraction from the business.
the people who haven't done it yet, I imagine, stand on the sideline and watch the roller coaster and say, that's really scary. And the people who have done it a bunch are basically kind of screaming with joy, going, this is really scary. Or enjoying that. Hello, sir.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Well, thanks for taking time, and I was so excited. This funny how we got here. This was from an outreach that you had
Yeah.
to sort of dig in and ask about your product, and now we're here talking about building things. I think we talked about it a little bit, but the sort of background of zero to I thought about this when I was starting, as you do, right? You incorporate, no, wait, you don't do it that way. You buy a domain name and then you incorporate, and then you start gathering your business books, and you're like, what should I dig into reading to first? And obviously, zero to one is one of them, and I like it, and I like the principle, but I feel like I'm in that very zero to kind
Yeah.
of state where you're like, I can't tell you what one is right now.
Yeah.
Even if I got money,
Yeah.
or funding, that wouldn't be one. And so, um, what I'd love to do is start before we get into Vera, like to go back. You've got a very serial entrepreneurial
Yeah.
background and history. So I'd love to go like before your first venture, kind of your background of what kind of led you to that place. Did you start in sort of the traditional linear path of school and career, and then sort of broke out of that, or did you get right into entrepreneurial, or kind of what did that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I had a super unconventional I guess, upbringing. I lived all over the world. I mean, I was born in Peru in South America, in a place called Cusco, which is the kind of city near
Nice.
Machu Picchu. And then lived between Australia and Peru, kind of growing up, and then went to high school in Barcelona.
Oh
And
my gosh.
super exposed to a whole bunch of different places and people. And I think that's really kind of what taught me the adaptability that I think is really needed in entrepreneurial life, being able to constantly adapt. And yeah, I guess, from high school days, I'd always be a hustler. I'd always be selling things. I'd always be, finding ways to make money. I mean, naturally, maybe shouldn't say all the things I did, in high school to make money, but I was definitely hustling hard. And then yeah, then basically was sure that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Left, I guess, high school in Barcelona, moved to Australia. Was pretty adamant that I wasn't going to go to college, but then someone convinced me that I should. I found an entrepreneurial course, applied, got in, and then basically in my third year of that course, I actually decided to drop out. Basically, the natural entrepreneurial way. I was like, look, I'm not learning a huge amount. I want to be spending most of my time actually building businesses, and I started my first business basically, and yeah, I mean that was kind of the early journey before I guess kind of the entrepreneurial part.
I love that. Your journey in all the different countries is what I wish for my boys. I think my outcome for what I'm building Stackless for. Obviously, I want to build something that I think people will enjoy and be able to sort of use to share, their favorite things, and to make that easier than it is, and to share moments of kind of joy and excitement with other people. But really, personally, for me, I don't want boats, but I do want the ability to be like, I want to take the boys to Portugal for a month. You know what I mean? And just sort of give a lot more of that. In the area that I live in, I think a lot more of my circle is like you grow up here, and then you go to school here, and then you sort of get a job here, and
Sure.
it's all within this sort of very, that the same matrix structure for everyone. And I
Sure.
think I was always built to, like, I'm always just railing against that sort of like, this is the way
Yeah.
things are, and this is how you should think about things. And so I love that. I love um that you kind of started, and your foundation was, there is no matrix. you know, you're just sort of trying and learning all the different things, which is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially with raising kids, I mean, I think that, even at the time as a kid, it was hard sometimes moving from place to place, but I think that looking back at it, I really do embrace it, and being exposed to so many different people and different cultures. I think it's just part of the kind of, the path of, kind of growing up, as a kid, and yeah, I wouldn't take back any of it at all. And with my kids, I want to do the same thing as well when I have.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. Well, and you and I are similar in that same sort of. I hit my third year, and I was in a class
Yep.
in my sort of early junior year, and it was a computer class, computer processing something, and they handed out the syllabus, and they said, today we're going to learn Microsoft Word. And I stood up and I never went back to school. I was like, no thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather stay up super late and all the way into the morning and just like picking at stuff and like figuring out how to do things
Yeah.
and sort of naturally ingrain that learning in myself versus sort of going through ABC and then sort of reciting it back to you. So I love that. Um, and then what was your first, like, what was the impetus and what was the spark that sort of led to like, all right, I'm gonna go set something up, and what was it?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to set up a business. I actually, I guess part of the reason well, there's so many drivers for me wanting to be an entrepreneur. I mean, one of the kickers was I actually worked at a large professional service firm when I was 19, and then saw what a 9 to 5 job was at a bureaucracy, basically a large corporation. I was like, look, I want to. This is not for me. I don't think I can work for anybody, and I want to create the best working environment for other people. And that kind of really was one of the catalysts. So I did a few odd jobs while I was at college, but really was trying to focus on starting a business essentially, and that was kind of one of the primary drivers. And then yeah, I guess started my first business. It was actually a company called Get Appy, so GET space APPY, and it was kind of around the time when there was like the third or fourth iPhone basically was being kind of released, and I basically saw opportunity in apps and found a South American kind of app development company, and I looked to basically outsource to them and find clients in Australia. And that's kind of the first company was like a kind of app development service company that kind of got me exposed to, I guess, the technology side of things. And
Nice.
yeah, that was really my kind of first entrepreneurial. I wouldn't say it was a great company. I mean, in a sense, there was definitely learning. I got a few customers, but at the same time as well, it wasn't necessarily. I was just going to maybe go for large corporates. Me kind of being a 20-year-old dude, and that maybe wasn't necessarily the right fit. Um, but then, over time, then that business then evolved into another business, and yeah, and another business, and yeah, the kind of rest is history. Yeah.
That's amazing, and yeah, it's so funny how similar you and I are in that sense. I left and I went to work for a company, and I was killing it in sales. I'd never done sales before, but I went to my manager and asked, like, I want to talk about management, and she's verbatim. She's like, "You're only 21. You don't need to worry about management." And I was like, I was very much
Yeah.
like flip the table. I'm like,
Yeah.
whatever. So I left, and I realized that company was at the early, like, website era was selling doctors and lawyers and real estate agents. They had packages that were like
Yeah.
10,000, 15,000, 20,000 for these websites. I'm like, that's silly. So I went and I got a book and taught myself how to, and I set up an agency. And I'm basically like, look, how about 8 and I'll do it all for you? And they're like, great. I don't want to even talk about like just
Amazing.
set something up and go do it. I'm like, and so it was a little bit of that arbitrage between sort of where we were
Yeah, I can imagine.
and it wasn't a good business either, but I had an office and a logo,
Yes.
like,
Awesome.
and I was hustling to people that are like, what's a website and why do I even need one?
Yeah,
But it was a fantastic learning to
for
like just
sure.
getting your hands on like offering something and someone would pay you for something and like building things and the process of the creative to the development and QA. And so I love that early period of learning sort of trial by fire.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's exciting, and it's like an exciting time. I mean, starting a business, and that's probably why I'm doing it again after so many different times, is because I just enjoy it, and I enjoy the early stages and the early hustle and the all the unknowns that come with a very early stage business, and going from kind of idea to kind of actually, building something out. It's yeah, it's definitely super exciting, and every single day is incredibly different to the day before.
What would you say to people that are I imagine my hypothesis that a lot of people don't start a company because of that, like the blank page, hitting file new, and sort of being like,
Yeah.
okay, What do we do first?
You know,
Well, of course, you buy a domain name first, but like after that, it's there's this whole sort of like, okay, and you've done it a number of times. What do you feel like is kind of how you've approached that like that file new era of the first week, first month, first quarter kind of starting to tackle things. How do you kind of approach that now?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm hyper opportunistic as a person. I think that's really important to be hyper opportunistic and always kind of like, I think just the way my brain naturally works is I'm constantly looking for different opportunities everywhere, basically. I'm always asking lots and lots of questions of anyone, regardless of whether it's a person that, runs a grocery store down the road, or whether it's an Uber driver, or whether it's, somebody that's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm just so inquisitive and ask so many questions, and I'm constantly looking at different opportunities, I guess. And I think that, really, I guess that early stage where you kind of got like nothing basically, other than kind of maybe some concepts or some opportunities. I think that is an incredibly exciting time. I mean, there's no structure basically. Like say goodbye to structure at all. The typical career path is get a job and then someone's going to tell you exactly what you need to do, and you just follow this path.
Right.
Basically. It's like following instructions. But it's like create
The business plan.
exactly
Like, having a set business plan that's, like, it's perfect, and it looks like the thing from Jerry Maguire is just not a
100%.
thing.
I even think business plans are a bit out the window. I mean, I remember being taught at college that the business plans were really important as well, just kind of on that. But really, I guess starting with out even a business plan. I mean, I think that the exciting part of the early stage is just talking to who your potential customers are. I think that's the very first starting point. Talking to them, understanding their problems, understanding the solutions, and really just kind of starting it that way. Yeah. So I think if you've got the very blank paper and you've got a kind of sense as to the industry, the opportunity, or the idea, then the first thing to do is kind of start talking to people. And there's nothing better than talking to people, the prospective customers, because if you get that from them early days, you can then convert them into customers down the track. And I think that that's really the most important part. And I think that, that's what I try to go through is that, okay, if I have something, if I see an opportunity, I do my research, I talk to people, research, talk to people. And now you got tools like, ChatGPT and stuff like that, where you can, ask a ton of different questions very, very quickly. And, and how to do anything, and really just be able to reach out to people and talk to them, is kind of the starting point. And I love that. I love the research. I love talking to people. So that's really, I guess, how I look at kind of the taking the blank page and then starting to kind of, add the notes to it per se.
Yep.
Kind of the inception point. But yeah, I mean, if you like structure, if you like to kind of be guided by a set of instructions, that the entrepreneurial kind of path is probably going to be a bit daunting and a bit tough maybe.
And wearing, because I think it's one of those that you can have it. I've had I
Mm,
don't know how if you've had this, but, like, I've had days where I mean, I start and I'm in ultra mode and I'm
mm,
like, "Oh my gosh, where I'm getting it." And by the end of the day, I'm like, I've never wavered from the vision that's in my head of
yeah,
the end point of where this is gonna go. That has never. I think if anything, it's super blurry in the start, and then as you start to chip away at things and talk to people, pieces of it have a little more definition, and you feel better about that. But I've never wavered from that vision. But I do have periods where, like, you can start in sort of ultra mode at the beginning of the day and feel great about stuff,
yeah,
and by about 2, you're sort of like, "Is this the right path? Are we even I don't even am I spinning on something? Is it like," and you start to and you can be more confused. I've had other days where I start not sort of grumpy, like, and I'm like, and I'm a little worn. And then I have one or two conversations, like a conversation like this, or a conversation with an advisor, or like I talk to a customer and their mind is sort of blown, or they've peeled the onion of what Stackless can be, and they're just like, and they get it, and you
yeah.
leave the call and you're like, "Oh yeah, like the world doesn't know what's coming." But that happens inside of a day sometimes.
100%. I mean, it's so interesting to say kind of the cycles of the day as well. Like I always find in the evenings, I'm super excited. I'm up late, I'm working away, and then I'm like, yes, this is great. And then I wake up the next morning and I'm like, just wait, what? Like, and then my kind of logical play comes in, it kicks in, and I'm a bit like, that's a bit of the naysayer. Yeah, and be like, just wait, no, 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 problem, problem, problem. But that's very much, I guess, yeah, there's constant ups and downs, and I think naturally those ups and downs there's going to be extreme ups and extreme lows. My view always is in the extreme highs, always celebrate, always be happy, always like every single milestone really, really counts and make it count basically. But then for every single low, then just take that as an opportunity to basically find a solution. You know what I mean? And Well,
Yeah.
the best, I guess, bits of advice I've ever received, which is actually not even business advice, but I apply it to business, is my older brother's actually an architect. And I asked him, what part of the design process do you enjoy the most? And he actually said he loves it when he's making a building and then, the council comes back with here, you can't have this limit or you got this constraint or the client says these constraints. And he basically says, I love designing within constraints because it creates more kind of opportunity for you to really innovate and kind of come up with more radical ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have. And same
Right.
thing in business, constraints equal opportunity. Whenever there's a constraint in business or something that doesn't go right, look at that as an opportunity, basically. And I think that's I
Hmm.
constantly tell myself every constraint, it becomes an opportunity. And I think having that kind of mindset really has helped me at least.
Speaking of constraints, how has it typically gone, or has it changed in terms of funding and financing the businesses that you've done? Did you start sort of bootstrapped and now you're sort of more angel, or or more sort of funded, or is it like, what does sort of constraints look like from a funding perspective, and how that's evolved in how you approach your
Yeah,
businesses?
definitely. I mean, my first businesses were definitely bootstrap, basically, but they were more service companies that didn't require capital. I mean, like, we could just go out and, build up customer base, and basically then, we're basically instantly profitable. And that was a company called Paperclad, which was after Get Appy, and that became really profitable really early on, and we grew really quickly. But as a service company, we didn't need outside capital. But then started actually co-founding startups. So actually started moving towards actually building startups and co-founding those. And yeah, I mean, traditionally, it depends on kind of the time, but back then it was very much around raising capital from like kind of, family and friends and fools essentially, and angels. And then I guess as the business has scaled, you're obviously then seeking kind of more institutional funding and stuff like that. But I guess how things have changed now, I mean, it was pretty crazy with Vera. Early this year, managed to basically raise a pre-seed round of basically an idea and a deck, and raised 1.5 million super quickly. But that's also
Amazing.
market and I think the background and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, constraining, raising capital and having that as constraint, it puts pressure on you, when it's harder to raise capital. And I think that's something that's really valuable to understand is that, capital is not
Mhm.
key to like building a good business. It accelerates the business. It means you can move more quickly, which is fantastic, which is great. But, the constraint on not having capital actually makes you more resourceful and,
Hey.
and potentially identify opportunities or do things that you wouldn't if you just had a bunch of cash in the bank. So I think that's really important to understand that the capital can be a constraint, as much as not having capital as well, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think that how it changes your mindset when you think about, you hear the early stories of, I remember the early stories of like the founder of Pinterest going to the Apple stores and basically making all of the Apple Macs have the homepage of Pinterest, like in the Apple store, or
The
like,
hustle.
I remember there was a great one from Bumble that the founder was saying that they would go to college campuses and put up signs that said no Facebook, no Instagram, no Bumble.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it was sort of like people were like, "Wait, what is this thing I'm not allowed to have?" And then
I
you're
love
sort of
that.
like going to download it, and get it. And that didn't cost, it doesn't cost. And so I think that's a great mindset also, not to sort of live or sort of dwell on that. Like, I could probably take this much further, much faster, if only I had enough to run a bunch of Google ads or a bunch of Facebook ads, or or whatever, versus figuring out those ways to adapt to it. I think from a funding perspective, I also, have you ever read uh The Creative Act, Rick Rubin? It's a really good, like, Rick Rubin, one of the best music producers, is probably the most organic. He feels like if there's anybody on earth who's sort of tapped into like the creative source
Yeah.
in the universe, that he's one of those that, as the bands are playing, like, he's sort of sitting in this meditative pose and he's sort of soaking it all in. And but his book is great, and I definitely recommend, like, it's the most extreme of just sort of letting things
Yeah.
happen. And there's a great story that he tells of when he was working with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, that they were sitting recording, and Anthony Kiedis was working on some stuff, and I guess Rick came by some papers and some stuff that was laying around. He read this poem, that was laying on the table, and he asked Anthony about it, and then he was like, "No, that's not for the band. It's just a personal poem that I wrote." And Rick was like, "Well, you should totally record it." And he's like, "But this isn't." it's not chili peppers, like, it's not of the vibe, it's not
Yeah.
of the spirit of chili peppers, and Rick was like, "Why not?" And so Anthony took it to the band and they recorded it, and that was Under the Bridge, and it was, like, one of those things where it sort of it tests that, like, what is the chili peppers, though? Like, what is the you're saying it's not this, but what is that thing?
Yeah.
And I love that I'm enjoying while I do wish that we sort of, had more capital at the place that we were at to be able to sort of do some harder things that we wanna do around AI and some harder engineering things. I still love the place that we're at, that, like, I don't have anybody saying, "You really need to start getting more revenue really quickly
Yeah.
to prove that this is a thing,"
Yeah.
because what we're building is a new habit, it's a new mindset,
Yeah.
it's a new thing for people, and I don't wanna sort of ruin that by being like, I gotta make decisions tomorrow
Yeah.
about what will make people just buy this like crazy
Yeah.
around this one specific path. And so, like, it's nice being able to sort of also be in a place, I think, sometimes
Sure.
when you're cash strapped, of just also being able to sit in it and sort of, like, let it unfold and become what it's gonna become versus being like, "We gotta drive against revenue, like,
Yeah.
immediately."
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. It definitely is. It definitely changes things raising capital. But at the same time as well, I think that there is support out there, but it does kind of put the kind of revenue kind of on your back much more quickly. But yeah, it's very very true. I mean, there's definitely benefits and disadvantages, but the early days, yeah, there's nothing like that kind of that really kind of thinking outside the box and really kind of coming up with different kind of, and also the pressure as well. I think that it's important to have pressure as well at every single point in business. And even, if you raise the capital, you shouldn't take the foot off the gas. Like, I mean, it's always should just be on basically. And I think that if anything, like the early days where you're cash constrained is where the extreme pressure is. And I think just embracing that pressure, and pressure is good, I do believe pressure is good, and it does push you, and it push you to do things you wouldn't, it push you to think in certain ways you wouldn't necessarily, which is great.
Yeah. I think about some of the biggest companies that have been out there, I think it's and I may be off on the numbers, but I think it was 7 years that Facebook didn't have any revenue. And obviously Amazon is famous
Yeah.
for getting on the investor calls and being like, "Don't expect
War.
anything for a while because we're building this sort of big behemoth," and then both of them sort of turn into this, like,
Yeah.
everybody uses it all the time, and so it's really interesting to take those perspectives.
Yeah.
So where did the, like I'd love to go back to, like, week -1 for Vera. Like, where did that start? What was the impetus for starting Vera? And also, what was that moment? Like, did you have any of the hair on the back of your neck or the goosebumps or, like, the sort of feeling that there was this thing that you wanted to dive into?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, so I was taking some time, basically a bit of a, I guess, sabbatical for a few months, and I was kind of just taking it easy, and I was like, I'm not going to think about business, I'm going to kind of just sit back and kind of, if opportunities kind of arise, and then I think I'll kind of, pursue it. And I remember just being, first of all, just being super interested in what was happening with AI. I mean, last year was a super interesting time. I remember seeing an article by Sarah Tavel from Benchmark, a really, really intelligent investor, talking about how software, the evolution of software is basically like providing an outcome to customers versus just like actually, helping with productivity. And that whole kind of mindset really, really got me excited. I looked at, some data, and it turns out that, businesses spend about $300 billion on B2B SaaS per year versus the 6.1 trillion on professional services. And professional services provide outcomes. Companies spend a lot more money on hiring humans than they do on software because humans provide outcomes. You know what I mean? And they pay
Yeah.
professional service firms a lot more money than software because they're getting outcomes basically. And that really clicked to me. And I thought, there's definitely an opportunity here. I really like the SMB space, selling to SMBs. I think that, you can kind of use PLG motions. You can target them in ways. If you get the right kind of channels and channel partners, then you can really scale that very, very quickly. And it's just a good market. You can get like low CAC payback periods, which customer acquisition payback periods. Typically it's lower than, the enterprise space. So decided, well, I've got a background in kind of creating multiple different companies. I kind of originally before Vera, I actually kind of explored creating a venture studio, basically, where it'd be like starting multiple different businesses, but very specifically providing software to SMBs and in the kind of more G&A or the administrative side of things, And as going through that process, realized actually, better off having actually one business, and focusing all the effort on one business. And that's how I guess, Vera came about, and then really started doubling down on Vera. And then, yeah, so it's been about 7 months now. And yeah, it's been a really exciting journey with Vera. So that's kind of, I guess, where the kind of inception of the idea and how it kind of evolved. And it's been evolving, it's been evolving. We initially made some assumptions and kind of kept on evolving the business, we're still evolving it. And but ultimately the kind of the core goal has always been the same, which is basically servicing SMBs and reducing administrative work. Basically, that's where the opportunity that we really saw in the space.
Who's your ideal client, for those listening from a Vera perspective? And I guess maybe give
Yeah.
the kind of a bit of the, not the elevator pitch, but give the short sort of background of what Vera is, and also who your ideal client is.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess Vera is very much evolved, but Vera basically let me just talk a little bit about the foundation, a little bit of like kind of the thinking first. It's basically, I guess, when it comes to admin, like admin, basically any types of kind of ops and admin and even finance, related roles at businesses. Typically it's to do with information, basically moving information from one place to another. A lot of what people do at businesses is moving information from one place to another. And what does that involve? It involves basically taking information which now is stored across all different software tools, pulling that information together, then using that information, for example, working with service providers like accountants and lawyers and the like, basically. So we saw an opportunity to basically pull all that information, basically from all the different third parties, and then put it in a meaningful kind of structure where that can then be shared with different third parties, like your accountant, for example, and eventually more different service providers as well. And we kind of explored government obligations where once we actually have customer information, then we can basically then provide things like government obligations. But really what we found is the kind of core of what we do at Vera is we basically pull fragmented information from businesses from different tools, and then we structure it and basically then provide that data to kind of third parties like accountants that, that the business works with, and just kind of simplifying all that back and forth and removing the need to have checklists and all that kind of stuff. So think of Vera as basically kind of your information gathering and manager, basically within your business, that manages all that information for you and then provides to the key different parties, and also organizes it for the business itself so they can kind of find the right data and be able to use that. So that's the kind of, I guess, the elevator pitch. It wasn't an elevator pitch. It was definitely a background, but very much around organizing and sharing information on behalf of businesses, basically. That is kind of the nutshell. The same way a human admin would within a business. A lot of the administrative people, whether they be the business owner or somebody who works as kind of the admin or ops, they're basically working with different tools, pulling information from their email, from document storage, from their HR software, from their accounting software, from all these different ERPs, all these different types of software, and they're having to pull that information and then use it in a certain way and then push it out somewhere else. We're replacing that piece basically there. So it's really exciting, and ultimately we want to basically reduce down, the administrative workload on businesses. That's our ultimate goal with Vera. Is how can we significantly reduce the kind of the human element that's needed to do the really tedious, boring administrative tasks like taking information from one place and putting it in another place.
As someone who started multiple businesses, does this come from a pain?
Yeah. Absolutely. The amount of times I've kind of, filled out forms for accountants or done like due diligence forms with investors or, provide information to lawyers or even shared information internally or, shared information with like, I guess, shareholders and stuff. Like it's just, there's a whole bunch of suppliers that got the information. There's just a huge amount of administrative work when you break it down in that whole kind of information exchange.
Have you ever seen the movie Inside Out, where all the little emotions
Yeah.
that live in
Yeah.
in
Water.
brains?
Yeah.
I have one of those characters in my brain who basically sits at a desk and is incredibly nervous that there's something about the state of Georgia or the IRS or a lawyer or a file or a form that I haven't filed.
Yeah.
And this character basically sits nervously, like, in the background most days, being like, "I hope I don't get an email being like, 'You are extremely behind on this thing,' or 'You no longer get to use this thing anymore because you did not file this.'" And I'm like, I just hope that And especially as a small business owner, when you're starting and you have all these pieces, right? I've got the IRS and I've got the state of Georgia, and we've also got like state of Delaware, and we're a foreign entity in Georgia for Delaware,
Yeah.
and then I've got my who do we file through? I went through Clerky, and so Clerky's got the paperwork there, and then my lawyer who also ties into Clerky and Pulley, and then and then we've got our 1099s and sort of and all of these things that are sort of in there, but I can't like and part of my neurodivergency and how I sort of work on all the things all the time. I definitely don't have, and I should, but like administrative hours where I sit down and work on all that stuff. I'm
Mm,
just trying to sort of like get that new feature out,
100.
get a handful of new clients signed up today. I'm getting closer to that 100, fanatical users. Like that's all I'm worried
Yeah.
about. And that poor little administrative guy sitting at his desk is just like sweating his tapping his foot.
No, 100%.
Like,
The truth about it is that, I mean, like, if we look at the biggest stakeholder in the business is the government in a lot of ways, and the thing is, running a business should be much easier than it is. Businesses should just focus on their product and service and growing the business. That's what they should focus on. They shouldn't be focusing on all this administrative workload and all these kind of requirements the government set for you. That's just something that, we really, I guess, at Vera want to liberate businesses from the administrative shackles so they can focus on what they really care about, which is their product or their service and growing their business, and that's the fun part of running a business, not all this other stuff, as you just mentioned. And we're looking to, I guess, any small business, or small medium business, or startup in the US. That's our target market, and also we're partnering with accounting firms actually, to basically make that whole kind of information exchange between small businesses and accountants much more simple.
so with the evolution of your sort of ideal client that would come sign up for VRB, so you've got me,
Yeah.
right? As a small business owner, I started this up. I'm wearing a million hats, but then as I grow, I start to add either like a chief of staff or somebody who runs operations or somebody who sort of
Yeah.
is looking over that administrative sort of legal, financial, people, HR. As that comes up, that person also basically you're taking all those tasks off of that person, and now they have a centralized place to sort of look out of that, which I imagine then opens up hours per week or
Oh,
per month or whatever, that they also don't have
100%.
to have that nervous personality tapping their foot in their brain.
100%.
um
We're
yeah,
removing all the kind of like the mind numbing kind of administrative side, but we're also providing expertise as well. So we're kind of doing the two sides, like the expertise, really understanding the business, as well as actually understanding, I guess, the kind of more mundane tasks. And yeah, as you mentioned, as businesses scale, we kind of see Vera taking care of certain administrative business functions for the business, so it will
yeah.
negate the need to hire somebody to do certain administrative, things, because we can do that for the business. Um, and you kind of see how it kind of evolves, but that's really where we kind of see Vera kind of fitting in, which is kind of, I guess, the journey.
So we've gone over sort of history and then what Vera is. I think we think about now and into the future.
Yeah.
Like what happened in your mind the morning after 1.5 million settled, and you went like, "Oh, okay, great. We've got some capital." Like
Yeah.
what was the next sort of like set of decisions that you made around sort of like how are we gonna sort of activate this, and what are we gonna focus on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, raising the capital was just part of the journey, but we'd already kind of started, the process before even raising capital. We started talking to customers. We started kind of, coming up with, I guess, designing it out, and I guess once the capital kind of came in the bank, I mean, historically, I've raised a bunch of capital from other businesses, basically, so it was kind of nothing new, but it basically meant, okay, we've got this capital. It means that we can move a bit more quickly and we can kind of bring in more expertise, basically, for different areas. And that's the kind of way to look at it, I guess, and I guess, was it daunting? Yeah. I mean, you're always raising capital because ultimately, you've got more and more shareholders in the business, and, it does augment pressure in a lot of ways, as well, so that's something that, to take into account. But honestly, just it was a good milestone for the business, but it was really the starting point. It was, yes, it was a celebration, but it wasn't anything major. It was really like, okay, things are real now. Really gonna have to, put the foot down and really kind of have to move, and that's always kind of been the I guess the case is raising that capital. But yeah, it certainly does, help for sure, but it doesn't change a huge amount. It just means things can move more quickly, and you can bring on people and expertise and services, to help kind of grow and identify opportunities for the business.
Even though you've raised in the past, I imagine there still has to be that, like, that morning you wake up, you grab some coffee, you log in, and you check the balance, and you sort of go,
Of
like,
course,
"Okay, there's there's the breathing room and the opportunity and all those sort of things." I imagine those have to be sort of good
100%.
moments.
Yeah, and I also kind of, also, I mean, one of the companies I co-founded is a Series C company, another one's a Series B company, like much later stage businesses. And, I remember those businesses, getting at certain points where, the runway was, dropping, and basically it meant that, we'd have to raise, and the really pressure was to raise. And that's something that, is something to be really conscious of as well, is that, yes, you raise capital, yes, it's exciting, but, depending on how the business is growing and stuff like that, ultimately you're probably going to need to raise another round of capital if you want to maintain that kind of same level of growth. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess, one of the big things is that, I guess, you know what I mean? Having to raise capital,
Right.
so I mean, yeah, it's kind of one of those kind of blessings and a curse. Definitely raising capital is fantastic, and we really appreciate our investors, and it's a good nod that intelligent people of backing us as a business, but at the same time as well, it's that capital needs to be used to get to a certain milestone, and then there's going to be another milestone from there. But yeah, it's definitely comes with its challenges, but that comes to experience as well. Making sure you got a good runway when you're raising this round of capital. You don't want to be freaking out because you completely run out of runway. That's something you don't want to necessarily be at. But yeah, it's definitely a relieving feeling. You've got a good amount of cash in the bank, and yeah, it makes you a bit more money conscious as well, and capital conscious. Yeah,
For aspiring or let's say new entrepreneurs that are sort of starting into something, how do you typically handle the story evolution when raising capital, especially in the early
yeah,
days? There's that sort of like you've got this sort of blurry gray, version of a vision in your head, and you're starting, but the process, especially the first, month, 6 months, year, is sort of uncovering that, and it's evolving.
yeah.
How do you sort of marry that story evolution with also what feels like you have to have a very definitive, digestible thing to be able to sort of have investors be confident in putting money into it? How do you sort of balance that dichotomy?
Yeah, definitely. And it really depends, I guess, the stage of the business and how early the business is. But, I think what investors really care about is that, that they want to make sure that, there's a strong vision to the business, that they feel the team can execute on that vision, is another really important piece, to really kind of hone in. So having that kind of strong vision, having, I guess, the team that can execute basically. And then also just kind of understanding the market you're going into well, and, that it's a large enough market. I think they're kind of the three main things to kind of be conscious of when kind of creating that narrative to investors, especially in the very, very early days. Because in the very early days, you're kind of painting a picture. Whereas kind of in the later stages when you're raising capital, you're kind of saying, well, this is the proof points and this is what the future looks like. So it's a kind of different kind of strategy with each, but very much in the early days. And I know this podcast is focused on the very early days. It's very much around, having a really kind of, having a strong vision, and it doesn't have to be 100% ironed out, but it has to be like a strong vision, and then having a team that can execute on that. And then basically having, an understanding of the market, and that it's a large enough market. And they're the three kind of real factors to kind of really, really push in the early days when it comes to the storytelling of the business.
And I imagine, you've got a vision for Vera, but it's, as you said, it's evolving. What's your hypothesis for the next kind of couple of years, even in that sort of semi-definitive kind
Whoa.
of place? Like where do you imagine sort of or envision yourself sometimes in that, time traveling into a year or two from now, and where Vera's at, and what the offering and the focus is?
For sure. I mean, naturally with businesses, it's very like rare that businesses suddenly is like, this is the plan, this is what we think is going to happen, and it actually happens. It's constant evolution. And I think that if you look at any kind of, you can Google like anybody listening can Google the startup curve basically, and it just Google image search it, and you'll see basically this is like, the excitement of, the idea, and then the reality sets in, and then it's like moving up and down the chasm basically of like trying to find the opportunity and trying to find the right opportunity. And then you kind of like hit on something and you're like, okay, this looks good, and maybe it isn't, but maybe it is, and then that's when you're like, okay, then you can start scaling that basically. So I guess with Vera, we've kind of explored different opportunities. We've kind of like tested the market, and then I think we've kind of narrowed down to something we actually think's a real hair on fire problem, which is
Hmm.
defined by Sequoia Capital. Actually, I have this whole article about product market fit. Is like hair on fire basically is like a problem that people really, really need, and it's probably the quickest way to get product market fit. And through kind of testing a few different things, we kind of think we've kind of narrowed it down to a hair on fire problem, basically. And I think that that's the kind of the evolution. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the evolution, and I think that we're getting closer to a hair on fire problem that will then get us to the point where we'll get to a product market fit. I think as a business, and I think that the evolution for Vera over the next couple of years is I think really be able to hone in on that kind of hair on fire problem, and then be able to kind of then take that and then kind of expand from there as we scale the business and kind of further embed ourselves into the business basically, because our plan is to embed ourselves very deeply into businesses over time.
Yeah.
But I think it's really kind of finding that wedge and that inflection point. So I'm hoping we've kind of found that inflection, that wedge, basically. And now it's just a matter of kind of pushing that wedge in and then starting to kind of expand out. That's where I see the kind of next, year or two going. But what's really important as well, and this is something I learned from my previous businesses, is making sure you're targeting a big market. So we're definitely going after a big market. That's I guess really important, but also having a really kind of unique and strong go-to-market strategy, basically. And if you
Right.
have the right partners, I think that if you can really scale really, really quickly, having the right partners, and there's a lot of businesses that are partnered with the right kind of, different industry partners, and they've done really well. I mean, for us, we're partnering with accounting firms, and that's our kind of way to reach the market, basically, through
Mhm.
firms, but also potentially through lawyers and different professional service firms. We see that as our avenue to market. But yeah, it's really, I guess, testing that out as well is going to be one of the big things we're doing. But for any business that's starting, try to find a unique channel to market, one that can really scale very quickly, and ultimately try to create a network effect. Any business that creates a network effect is on the money. And typically network effects are kind of done from the bottoms up. So typically, product-led growth motion or freemium motion or something like that. But you can create a network using that basically. So it's ultra low barriers of entry. And then you can create a network by basically having an element which is, exposed to other different people that are in the similar, have a similar need to you. That's the real crux. So I think that's a winning formula if you can crack that.
Nice. I love that. Um, Personally, if we look into the future, where do you see yourself on this? Have you found your product market fit in building, and obviously the history that you have with starting businesses, and then also thinking about and starting to get into a venture studio? Do you see yourself getting into that place where it's sort of like, where create that venture studio model of sort of creating and seeding and growing things, sort of more at scale, or mentoring, and so sort of helping other people do that, kind of in the future?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the venture studio. I mean, potentially there could be spin-offs, from Vera, spin-off companies, potentially. There's a company that's actually called Invisible, which is a fantastic company. It's growing like crazy, and they're doing extremely well. They have a ton of, they're very profitable as a business, and they've started spinning off their own ventures, which is really interesting. So invisible.co is the URL, and they have Infinity, which is all these AI-enabled service companies that they've spun out, So what I see the future being, and depending on how the kind of business goes, there might be an opportunity for us to spin out, businesses, but that's going to, be eventually one day maybe. But for now, it's really, I guess, focusing on the kind of the business. But yeah, I mean, well, what does the future hold? I mean, building a business that I think, can actually have a big impact on businesses. And like I said, if I can look back in 5 years' time and say, we've liberated businesses, small businesses from administrative shackles, basically, so they can focus on what they really enjoy, which is the product or service or in growing their business, then that's, I think, going to be, the biggest reward that we can find, and hopefully that's going to impact, tens, if not hundreds, if not millions of businesses by that point. So yeah, that's kind of what the future holds. So, but who knows? I mean, startups are like,
Yeah.
and who knows what they
Yeah.
hold, but I think we have a vision as a business, and we know where we want to get to one day. And it's very much around what I just mentioned, around just removing those administrative shackles. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that up and down journey, I think the people who haven't done it yet, I imagine, stand on the sideline and watch the roller coaster and say, that's really scary. And the people who have done it a bunch are basically kind of screaming with joy, going, this is really scary, or enjoying that ride,
It is a fun ride. I mean,
which
the
is
struggle is fun, Struggle, you look back at it. I
totally.
had some of my fondest memories of starting businesses is during the struggle times, And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, it's the up and down. It's the constant emotion of up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. One moment you're in the trenches, things aren't great. Next minute you feel fantastic. Like you said, you have an amazing meeting, you get a new customer. You see the business scaling really nicely. You see kind of like things you anticipated working. And then sometimes the trenches are when things don't work like you anticipated, but that's just natural. You're absolutely gonna have both those.
Yep. Cool. Amazing. Well, if I, as we kind of wrap up here, I appreciate you coming on and
Of course.
sharing your early stories and about Vera. I'm gonna link all of them. I'm gonna grab all the links of everything that we talked about and share it out. Any kind of parting piece of advice or something that you like sharing with the person who is either thinking of making the jump or just made the jump, especially as someone who started a number of businesses. Anything you would impart?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most rewarding thing on the planet to take something from nothing and create something. And business is like a living, breathing organism. It's in a way the ultimate challenge. It's the ultimate competition. It's like the ultimate sport. And yeah, it's you're never gonna feel better than, at least personally, than starting businesses and seeing them scale. There's no better feeling in the world. So just do it. Just try it. And what's the worst that can happen? It doesn't work. Well, fear of failure is, it's a bad thing. You just need to embrace it, and that's the only way. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for so much for coming on.
No,
I
of course.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much.